And I missed a recording on the first hour. Sorry. Oh, that was silly. Ah. Alrighty. Hopefully everybody's back. Does anyone have any questions about what we just talked about? And again, I apologize for not recording that first hour. I apologize. So no questions at all. This all has been making sense and absorbable. I think I'm covering a lot.
I'm sorry, I never. This is Mike Stiverland. No, I don't have any questions. A lot of this is, is a lot for me, but I kind of follow through. There's questions, but not questions from the standpoint of understanding what I'm looking at. Just how stuff is laid out, stuff like that. Not really questions of what we're looking at and what we're doing. Just the layout and why it's laid out the way it's laid out. Things of this nature. That's mine.
Okay.
But that ain't got nothing to do with this class. So it's stuff I need to compartmentalize, to find understand what's going on.
Sure. Okay. Understood.
I think to me the pace is good and I get to understand a lot. I seen some of the stuff, but I don't have any questions right now. I think I'm pretty sure later on will be some questions you dig more deep into it. But overall, the class is great. We appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. So, well, we got people talking. How familiar are we with Excel?
I am good with it.
Okay.
I'm very good with it.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Okay. No, so Vicky, so a lot of familiarity. And I don't do anything too crazy with it either. So, but I won't go, I won't go too baby with it. So on the break, um, I just added a few more things just so I can have a little bit more of a report. So we're going to say we took off everything. So we went through and we either got a linear foot count, we got an individual count, we got an area count, we got all these numbers for whatever scope of work. Um, Again, this is Bluebeam. I'm not going to spend too much time on a Bluebeam specific activity. Whatever software you use to do your takeoff, 9 times out of 10, 9.5 times out of 10, it's going to be able to produce some sort of Excel based output. And again, if it's just a takeoff software, it's just spitting out numbers. An estimating software may spit out all your takeoff with values automatically attached. And that's the difference. And we looked at that last week between a takeoff software and estimating software. We're just counting with this right now. So I'm not going to go into too much what I'm doing here because I don't know, you might not end up using Bluebeam, so that won't really be that helpful. But basically what I'm doing here is I'm telling it what to tell me, what to put on the Excel sheet, and then how to sort it out. So let's see what it produces here. I always have a little, I sometimes have to do it a couple times with Bluebeam. And you can see, so this is the output for Bluebeam. Um, it's fine. It's got everything I have here, but it's not the cleanest. And there's ways I can play with it to make it a little better, but I mean, this is typically the output. So this would be kind of your rough counts on everything. Now, what we want to do is we would need to convert this information into numbers, into our actual estimate. And unfortunately, um, I do have an actual template, a bid template, but as I mentioned, people put a lot of time into them, and even though we're in different states, and I can't imagine there would ever be uh, a big problem, I really just don't feel comfortable showing their proprietary um, bid sheet. But what I will show is kind of what I do to prepare for their sheet, and this is just kind of another. This is a step that is added because I do not have estimating software that'll spit out numbers. I need to get this takeoff, and then I create this sort of sum sheet for myself. So I want you to see it, it's the same thing. I went through Bluebeam and I counted all these things. I've tagged them. I've got my quantities. Bluebeam didn't do anything after this, after ABC. These were things that I added. And this is more or less how their template is broken down. So they've got a section for piping totals, they've got a section for fixtures, they've got a section for demo, cut and patch, testing and flushing. That is the company that I did this for is a pretty generic bid sheet. There's pros and cons to that. I think it borders on too generic. They should have, maybe they have a section that breaks out domestic water from sanitary. I have that information here, but if someone is just taking a quick look at one of their jobs based on their sum sheet, all they're getting is one line item for piping totals. But you can see that would be my process. It spits this out. I'd add my unit material. And again, this is going to be whatever makes sense for you. When I'm doing these sort of sheets, I'm always thinking quick reference. When I have to look at this job later and I've got a bunch of other things on it, there's been 2 jobs since I looked at this, there's other things going on in my mind. I want a sheet that I can look at and reference very quickly and know what I was thinking. How did I get to this number? What was my process here? So for each drinking fountain, $1,800. My unit material is going to be equal to that times my count. This is going to be the same all the way down. It's going to be money. So many little things everywhere. It's going to be the same equation. So if you're familiar with Excel, you can set up a basic takeoff sheet relatively quickly. So this is just going to be hours. I'm not putting that in material. Whenever I do a sum sheet, I collect all my hours on this kind of worksheet. And when I plug it into my final sheet, the final sheet has a wage rate. So you can see on this one, I'm calculating the total hours, because when I put all this information into that company's bid template, at the bottom, they have a spot where my total hours are multiplied by whatever they pay their field personnel. And that way, if it's prevailing wage, or if for some reason they have to, change what they pay their field personnel, it's a very easy change. You just type a different number in a box, and all the hours on the job get assigned a new wage rate, and the number comes down. So let's say we did that here. So let's say I'm not gonna do it. I went through and I put values to all this stuff. And I came out with a total. It's getting too busy. What did I do wrong here? Let's do, now we're just going all scopes. So we got some partitions. We totaled that to be 25,000 and 456 hours. We did some tile flooring. We figured it was gonna be 12,000. It's gonna be 365 hours. Me just being, I like my things correct. All right, so let's say we did our kind of rough takeoff. You know, we assigned values to all these numbers. And this would be something you'll have to do if you only have a takeoff summary or a takeoff software. If you invest in a estimating software, this sheet that it spits out will have labor and material units already on them and totals already there. So it's a big time saver. You'll probably have to adjust whatever it spits out to fit your market, or to fit your market really. But you know, that's the step you're paying for when you upgrade to an estimating, is where now I do all this and then I'm gonna put it into my final estimate. A piece of software can save you that. So this is how I broke up my estimate. I broke it up by piping totals. I broke it up by fixtures, demo, cut and patch, and testing, flashing. But this is just for my final kind of bid template or my final calculation sheet. If I needed to know more about my piping totals, I can go in back into my takeoff, and because I labeled everything, I could just quickly do an equals sum everything in domestic hot water. So if I needed to reference this later, I've got that information. But you know, on your final sheet, your kind of quick reference sheet, and the sheet that actually spits out your number you're going to give to your client, you know, you don't want it necessarily all of this stuff on there. Your final sheet should just be kind of super quick reference. So what I'm going to do, again, I'm doing this quick. This is something I would encourage you to really take your time on to make it yours, to make it make sense to you and what you do, but I'm just going to go super quick. So I'm going to have a material total. Again, I'm just, you know, more references. The more references, the better for me. And hell, you might want to be thinking, if you are hiring somebody, is this sheet something that's only going to make sense to you? That's not great either, you know? So part of when you're building this sheet, if you can nerd out on it like I can, I enjoy doing this sort of stuff, is, you know, not only does it make sense for you, is this something that you could teach somebody relatively quick? Just another thing. I say that because that's why I threw in that hours tag. So when someone's looking at that and they see a big number of material, and let's say 1,000, they don't think to themselves, $1,000 in labor, that doesn't sound right. You got a little tag. maybe it's useless, it helps me. So maybe I have my wage rate over here, maybe I have it up in the corner, wherever. Let's say you pay them right. Again, I like my labels, they help me. Labor total, cash money. Ah. And that's just going to equal your total hours times your wage rate. You know, maybe you want to put overhead and profit in that. Maybe you want that, you know, that's again totally subjective. You know, you might not pay everybody the same. You've got someone that's been with you 100 years and someone you just hired. Maybe you've got a couple different wage rates, and maybe you break up these hours between, you know, your quote, you know, your foreman or your best person versus a new hire. Or maybe you just go, well, I pay my best person 90 an hour and I pay the cheapest person 50. And so I'm just going to use 70, which is the average of, you know, 50 and 90. That's where, you know, figure out what works for you, what works for your company. Everybody's going to be different. But in the event that the project you're bidding is prevailing wage, everybody needs to have that number be the same. Everybody's paying their prevailing wage numbers. So that's why I like having it broken out. It's just a few, and you know, so I know how many hours are on the project. I know what I'm paying. If I find out, oh, it's, you know, it's not prevailing wage, I can pay whatever I want. I go 65, everything automatically changes, my labor total changes, etc. So that's why I like everything kind of working together. I don't like a sum sheet like this where if I change one thing, I have to go through and change everything. You know, I like it when I just change one thing and all the relevant information changes with it. So whether I change the total hours and if I change that to 12, hold on. Oh, that's because I got lazy. What did I do here? So my total hours. 992. Okay. Yeah, so that's why I like using the Excel forms so that if I go back and they might have deleted some fixtures from the job. So this is only 64 hours. And this is now 3,000. Everything's automatically changing in my bottom totals. And these bottom totals are, you know, going to be the final. So project subtotal. So this is labor and material for what I took off from the drawings and the specifications. So that is in theory my cost. So that's what I know. Now I know my cost. I know how much is material, how much is labor. I know how many hours I have total on the job. You know, somewhere on this sheet, I might have the schedule. You know, I might put this section down here that lets me know the duration. And I got that duration from the specifications. From that, I can say, okay, well, I've got 976 total hours on the job. And supposedly, I have to get this done in 2 months. I don't know if I've got the workers to do that, you know, and that'll click in your mind that, oh, this is a big project being done quick. This might need 6 people out in the field, you know, and that's the sort of thing you can come to when you've kept track of all that information. You've got the schedule somewhere when you can decisively say, this is how many hours I've figured for this project. You know, some of these red flags can come up. Or maybe, you know, not necessarily red flags, but things you need to consider. Maybe that means you've got some overtime. So maybe you can do a section for overtime. Maybe you've had that happen so many times that you set a standard line item in your bid sum sheet that you want this there all the time. You don't always have to use it, but it's there if you need it. So overtime is you add 15% to your to your labor subtotal. So your labor was 7808. So now I'm going to change that sum to include that. Boom. So now I just added something so that if I have a job that has overtime, I've got something in there automatically to do it. But you might not need it all the time, but I'd still have it on your standard template because it's there if you need it. It might be a reminder. But that's what I mean by standardizing, having everything kind of look the same so that you can get through it quick. You can, you know, it's going to contain things that might have tripped you up in the past that you might have forgotten about, but now you have it on your sheet. You know to check for it because there's a line item for it. And that's, you know, that would go in for me on how you break this out up here. If, you know, there's something that's usually on a job or something that might trip you up, throw a line item on there. That way, when you're reviewing this before it goes out to your client and you see a big zero somewhere where you don't think there should be a zero, you know to double check that really there's not a stick of cut and patch on this project. You don't have anything in there. You know, these templates, these standard templates can be a reminder of what's typically on a job, and then even not so typically. You can keep notes. That's why I say it's so customizable to what you're doing to do what makes sense to you. So there's no overtime on this one. So that's our project subtotal. So now is there sales tax on material? You could have a section here that takes this total and multiplies it by 0.09 or, you know, whatever. And you guys play with Excel. There's ways to, I'm just trying to go super fast here, but there's ways to have this kind of only turn on if you want it to. You can put a little box or you can write a formula so that you know, this doesn't necessarily automatically generate. Same with this overtime. Again, that's an Excel function, which is kind of a separate class. But right now, I'm just kind of going over basic formats. But these are the sort of line items you might want: overtime, sales tax. Do you want to do overhead and profit as a single markup? Or do you have a special overhead formula that you use? You can separate them. I feel like most of the time, overhead and profit is going to be one thing. You might have a section here that's where you put it. 20%, pretty optimistic in my market, but I've heard it's done. Even better. So we're going to say that overhead and profit applies to our project subtotal plus our sales tax. All right. Why am I struggling with this right now? I mean, the easier way would just, I mean, that'd be 20%, but I want it to link to this. I'd figured I just need to play around with it a little bit. But ideally, you would want that final line item to be, you should be able to adjust this and have it affect this. I just gotta think about it a second, but you know, that would be kind of your finished product almost. So like if you were bidding a project, you'd be like, all right, you know, and you're showing it, and maybe your estimator is showing it to you as the owner, or you're showing it to somebody for review. You know, these are kind of your quick hit numbers. How much did you have for labor? 976 hours. Okay, that sounds about right. Total labor. What was your wage rate? Okay, that sounds about right. Your material was what? I don't know, only 50,000. How much of that was for the flooring? Okay, 12, 365. So it's kind of a quick reference. And then if you go deeper, you go, man, that the piping just seems off. It seems like a lot of money for a little bit of labor. Like what? Can you show me more about your piping? Well, that's when you can get into your second layer. And this is the more detailed estimate. So that's when I say a sum sheet or a bid tabulation sheet. This is the general idea. You're taking your quantities, you're applying labor and material totals to them in a way that makes sense to you. And then you're organizing that data one last final time to be a quick reference. And the type of software you're using changes all that. That's why I really am not getting into how to use Bluebeam, you know, or how to, you know, how to do whatever you buy will be a little different, but they all, you know, any takeoff program is going to produce something similar to this. Some are better organized. Like I said, I do most of my organization with the tag I use, because if I start something with CHW, all the CHWs are going to be the same. So you can organize it by tag that way. That's something you'll be playing around with, whatever you use for your takeoff. But essentially, that's what's happening is you're taking your counts, applying material and labor units. For where you get your labor and material units, some of this stuff is going to be subs and vendors. You might send out this sheet, and I bet any material vendor would love this. So if you're doing railings, like ornamental steel or any of that sort of jazz, you know, they can probably do their own. They might prefer to do their own takeoff, but you can tell them I've got 40 feet of wall mount railing and I've got 80 feet of railings with a glass base. And then you can also send them the drawings. Leave this blank until they give you a number and then fill it out with their number. You know, but you might have to install it. Those labor units are something that either your experience, you might be able to look at that railing and say, yeah, it's about 20 feet. 2 people should be able to take it off in a day. Okay, if that's the way you want to write it in here, 2 people in a day. Is this my labor total? 2 people in a day would be 16 hours. So you could just say, I don't equals 16 hours divided by the length. So you're at 0.205 hours per linear foot. And then maybe start keeping track of that sort of thing. Using your experience to figure out, you know, what are my labor units for this different stuff based on what I know. Again, there's lots of programs out there that have labor units for all this stuff. RS Means was the one we talked about on Wednesday. That is the most general that I know of. Just, you know, general pricing program, and you see it referenced a lot. I don't know if it's the best for bidding. It tends to be on the conservative side of numbers, but it's there. I would say this is better off kind of being slowly built on experience, maybe supplemented by some sort of labor book. But this is why the building of this sort of template, again, that we just did, you know, we slapped this together really quick. But in reality, this is kind of this would be the crux of your business. This is what wins you jobs, because you can accurately put everything together. And when you really, really want a job, you can come down here and just say, change that to 5%. Listen, we really want it. You know, that's what we're going out at. Then if, you know, you can even add a line here. So we want to know what the profit is. That minus that. So you got just kind of quick reference here is, you know, listen, we're going at it 5%. We've only got 11,000 on top of this thing, but it's a client we've been trying to work with forever. You know, we want to be super aggressive. And with this sort of sheet, you can be aggressive. It isn't just picking numbers out and hoping for the best. It's all based on real things. It's you know, listen, we're pretty sure this is our cost. We're going out at this. Or listen, this client is a huge pain to work with. I don't even really want this job. We'll take it if we get it. But if we get it, we're getting 30% for it. Again, I am making this so this does this automatically, spending a little bit of time to figure it out. But these are the sort of things, and this is the sort of conversation you might have right before bid that a good sheet will really help with. You know, how aggressive are you being? Maybe whoever reviewed did a final review of the project saw a huge mistake in the partition labor, and they said, "Oh, geez, like you know, I think this. You know what? Add 20%. We'll hope for the best." If you have a good sheet, you can add a specific thing. Everything automatically calculates. It's real quick. You can check, okay, that number looks better, send it out. You know, that's the sort of manipulating the data, being able to play with the numbers. You know, I'd even recommend, we didn't do it on this one, but all of these to be linked to these, if you can take the time to do that. So that if I went through and I changed one of these linear feet or I changed a quantity, it would automatically change these totals. That's worth doing because that's something that's going to save you time in a crunch time. You know, the day the bid's due and someone's reviewing and you're seeing some things that need to be changed. A good sum sheet like this one, or not like this one because we did it so quick, but a good sum sheet that has all these functions will save you time and heartache if you get into a pinch. And there's all sorts of things that could be added to this bottom. You might have your project manager. You might add a section in there for that. If it's a super big job, they might require a safety personnel. You can have a line item for safety personnel. Maybe it's 90% blank, but it's there if you need it, and it's all linked up so that if you do use it, it all links up well. You know, this kind of bottom thing, that's where you're kind of accounting for the unquantifiable sections. And actually, realistically, you're almost definitely going to have a section for your subs and vendors. And that won't necessarily be a labor or a material total. It's going to be something you bought. Or, you know, vendor will be in your material, I'm sorry. But if it's a sub, they're going to have their own labor materials. You might have a sub category and just add up all your subs, whoever they are. You know, if you're a GC, you're going to have a billion of them. If you're a plumber, you'll have maybe an insulator and a few others. Electrical, you might have telecom and security and fire alarm under you as subs, etc. So, you know, you might have a sheet. Again, we've got a whole class on subs, so I don't want to go too far, but you'll have this sheet. You might have it continue and just have subcategories and different line items for all the subs you typically use. So that is what I wanted to go with, kind of taking your counts, applying units, labor, material units, organizing all that information into a way that is helpful and a quick reference for you and produces a number that you can trust at the end and that you can change quickly, relatively quickly. One thing, I guess, real quick, is if you are working on a project that is not a complete set of documents, there are some other ways to do estimating. Those are typically going to be either by square foot or usually they're going to be square foot numbers. And those are much trickier. Those are much, if you are the type that likes to put together an estimate based on your experience, that's kind of your time to shine. Because it's just going to be a lump sum number. Usually your domestic water will be, partitions will be one lump sum number. Interior construction might all be lumped together. I did want to show a kind of an example of an estimate done where there was nothing to take off. So this was a big tower project, and there were no drawings. There was just a narrative with square foots. So this was kind of the worksheet I developed just to kind of organize my thoughts and do a takeoff on something that didn't have any drawings. And you see here, I went through the narrative. So all they did was provided me like almost a spec book, but the spec book told me everything that was on the project. So they were just telling me they're replacing the water loop. There's 740 console units in the perimeter of the building. They're telling me to carry a certain amount for that up here, which is nice. But basically, you can see here, it's a whole different type of estimating because there isn't anything quantifiable. There's no linear feet unless they tell me it, unless they tell me what it is. Like here, 110 linear feet each floor. But so when I did this estimate, when I did this takeoff, I actually was just reading the narratives and I was putting a tag anytime I read something important to me. So when I read the narrative and it said you're replacing the water loop, I took off that sentence and said I'm replacing water loop. In that paragraph, it says there's 740 console units at the perimeter. I took that off as a tag labeled 740 console units at perimeter. So that when I printed out my report, like we did with like we did here, it just gave me that list that you're seeing. I got too many Excel open. That list that you're seeing of things I needed. So that's just another way to use a tag, to use takeoff, is just keeping track of notes, keeping track of things in a paragraph that I know I need to account for, and then doing my best. And these are rough numbers, hours per square foot. This is largely based on experience. You still have to justify these, but there isn't that skeleton of information that can't be argued like we have in that other one. We've got the backup. We took all this off. You can't argue with me, assuming I did a decent job of takeoff, that this is what the project consists of. We can argue about all this stuff if you want to, but the skeleton of the project, the counts that I actually took the time to do, you can't argue with me about that. In a conceptual, that's just not the case. All this stuff is up for debate because it's kind of based on experience and whatnot. But the point here is I'm still accounting for things that need to be accounted for, even when I don't have drawings. I'm still reading through and doing a takeoff of sorts, if anything, just to organize my thoughts. And it does provide some sort of backup. So even on this one, up at the top, I really just did a really rough what do I think a dollar, the dollar per square foot for each for the HVAC, plumbing, and sprinkler is here? Just really rough on, what do I see in the area, historical data, that's all in play on a estimate with no real finished documents. But that's not going to make anybody too happy. If I just go, yeah, I figured roughly $32 a foot, that's kind of what I'm seeing, because it doesn't let them play around with it at all. So then I just expanded it. So I went down here and I go, well, what if I actually took off everything they're saying and tried to apply to a number? Where do I end up? And then I compared them, and I think I was relative over 96. Yeah, I was within $1 million or so. So then I compared it to just what I did when I figured a rough square foot number, and they're not too far apart for a job this large. Yeah, so it's just I combined two different estimating things to check myself. So this is the most basic form of estimating is, all right, what's the square footage of the building? Yeah, it should be roughly this amount per square foot. Here's your number. Okay, if you've been doing it a long time, it might work. Hell, maybe you are just like Rain Man with these numbers, and you can spit this number out and it's going to be right. They're out there. Again, with experience, I've worked with a lot of people that are super smart that way. The fact is that no one else knows how smart they are. So when they start asking for, well, how'd you come up with that? Them just saying, oh, trust me, it's not going to fly, having some sort of breakdown. And well, I figured this, I figured 260 hours on 19 floors at $55 an hour. I figured this is of the equation up there. I can at least talk about how I came to that number. And that's appreciated, being able to have that conversation. And not just appreciate, it's going to be helpful because, maybe they go, actually, we're not doing the cooling tower this round. Well, instead of just some big lump number that I figured, I can actually go ahead and take out that cooling tower, get a new lump sum total, and tell them, all right, now I think it's this much. So even on a conceptual estimate where I'm not counting things, you're not spending 3 days literally just counting things on drawings, there's still something to be taken off. There's still benefit to having some flexibility in your number, to not just doing what I did on top, even though I use this as a check, because I still think, yeah, that's roughly where I should be based on what I saw in that area. But I know that's not going to fly, and it's not really what I get paid to do. So I provide a more detailed breakdown in case they want to eliminate an element, or in case they think I'm way off on an element. So that's a conceptual estimate that I did for somebody. There were no drawings. It was just a bunch of paragraphs on MEP. Let's see here. I do want to show you. So this is more for pre-bid. I do consulting for architects and engineers, which is a little different than construction, but this is my personal sum sheet for what I do. And again, this has more of a presentation value than you'd really need. This is designed so that someone can review and look at everything, but you can see I've got it broken up by scope. I've got these things automatically in here, zeroed out, but they're here just so I know, so I'll never forget to put a field office allowance because I have to read it every single time. So I must know there is nothing if I put it there. For plumbing, I know to make sure I do something for trenching. If there's below grade work, I put a little tag in there. The CSI codes I use are all the most typical CSI codes. So I just threw in some generic ones. They're not all of them. Plumbing is typical enough where there's very typical fixtures. So I just went ahead and this is my blank template. I just keep these in here so I don't have to type it every single time. They're that typical. And then that's all it's saying. Then over here, these markups, I apply to all of that. So again, this is kind of pre-bid. So all the design contingency. I've got market, depending if I do a lot of projects in New York City, which I imagine similar to Chicago is oh, no problem. Thank you, Juan. Is expensive. So depending on the city, I might want to mark it up a little bit. And then finally my overhead and profit. So it's, you can see it follows roughly the same thing we did on the other one, where it's all our information in tiny pieces, and then I'm condensing it. Again, this is a little different because this has more of a presentation value than, yours should just be, it's functional, it's easy to read, easy to teach, and it works for you. How it looks doesn't really mean anything. But yeah, it's similar. This is the one I did. All my labor gets put to the side here, and all my labor is linked to the wage rate, which is up here. So whenever I put anything down here, how many hours, it multiplies that by that and by the quantity, and it fills it in automatically here. And it all works like that. Oof. I think I got through that. I really wanted to spend a lot of time on this sum sheet, but we did a decent bit. Does anyone have any questions? Did everybody put their name in the chat? You can do that too and take the quiz. No questions? Sure, Mo. And we don't have too many people if you want to unmute. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so that's getting into some good stuff. So job code, as far as I know, will change per the job you're working on. There would be a couple ways. So you could set up, again, depending on the software, you could probably set it up to spit out things in a job code. But let's say all of your, I don't like this one. Let's go to a cleaner. All your domestic water or something, all of this has a certain job code. You would have a legend. I don't know if job codes would be more by scope or floor, or it'd be a lot, but 1, 2, 3, 4. First floor plumbing. I would just I'd go to your biggest takeoff, and then pretty much just see, that's why is this not going down? It's something you would have to know as you're doing your takeoff. Really, I guess, because it would probably be in my tag. If I knew that I had to break something out by job code, depending on how that job code is going, if it's I feel like they can be as broad as first floor plumbing, or they can be as specific as first floor bathroom 102 water closet. From what I've seen, I feel like they can get pretty wild. but it would either be something I addressed in the way I tag it. So if I knew that the job was coded by an area or by floor, instead of expansion tank, I might have, it would be, first floor, mechanical room B, expansion tank. And that's because I know that the job codes are by floor and by room. Or if I have it, if I have that job code legend, I guess I would just put it into my tag at the front. And just have all my tags by job code. Yeah, so road or excavation, you're going to be using mostly your volume takeoff, but let's see. The problem is I don't have a lot of good civil drawings. But it's going to be the same process, except if you're doing roads, you're going to have square feet of asphalt, square feet of concrete or sidewalk. And then you'd be checking your details for depth. Hopefully this has. All right, so a site plan. Um, Not quite road, but if parking lot still counts. I don't know if I've got a good representation of a road specifically, but if I were doing asphalt for the parking lot or curbing and all that jazz, it would be a similar process where I'd do a linear foot of my curbs. Usually the scales on site drawings are a lot larger. I do an area, asphalt, paving. Do a better job of staying in the lines than I just did. When I go through, that's probably sidewalk. I'd create an area for sidewalk. If you needed to know depth, this kind of goes back to the blueprint reading classes. So this is giving you your overview. You'd be reading all of these notes that apply specifically to site work. See it? Yeah, they do. They're telling you to provide new fire protection line. Concrete bench, concrete sidewalk. And then there will be details. So here are site work details. So that was your overview from 100 feet. But if you need to know depth, this is where they're telling you all your sub-base information, the depth of the sidewalk. If there were a road on this project, you would see something very similar, a detail like this, that's going to tell you your sub-base and the depths. And if you didn't find the information you needed here in terms of depths, again, everything should be provided with a depth. This one, I'm not seeing one. But it's going to be the same kind of process as we've talked with other ones, where you're going to have that plan view, that first one where we were taking off curbs and asphalt, and that's going to be your kind of most overview. And then once you want to get it, once you have a real question about, well, how deep is that pipe, or how deep is my sub base, you're going to have a detail page like this that's going to give you more information. And the software you would use, would have a volume takeoff. Now this does have it. I've just actually never used volume, so I'm not exactly sure if I'll get what I want, but a better piece of estimating software will give you the ability to just go and do an area takeoff like that and assign it a depth. So whereas before it gave us the square footage of this circle or of this rectangle, on a volume one, it gives you that square footage, and then you tell it the depth and it gives you a volume. And that's what you would use for excavation, I'd assume, is a volume. And you would get that again by cross-checking your details. So again, I don't think this has a road, but it has sidewalks, and it's telling you, your sidewalks are 6 inches thick, and there's a 6-inch sub base, the PSI on the concrete. Yeah, so again, it would be the same kind of process. You're just looking at it a different, you're looking at your S and or C drawings. These are C, yeah, they're either going to be site or civil. Yeah, hopefully that help. Is that what you're looking for? Because in terms of turning it to your sum sheet, it would be the same, except instead of linear foot. Thanks, Mo. Instead of linear foot, you'd have volumes and all that jazz. All right, guys. I think we'll call it. I hope you guys learned. I know I talked a lot. There's a lot to cover, but what I really want to get is the general idea. Yeah, except for the first hour, Edward, because I messed up. I didn't record the first hour, but everything on the sum sheet, I think we got. I apologize for that. Okay, guys, thanks again. That's the way to do it.